Welcome to the 128th season of the Canadian Club Toronto, Canada's Podium. For over a century, this platform has been a gathering place for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to discuss the most pressing issues of our time.
We've been having important discussions and debates around this podium in this country for well over a century. I call this a historic podium of record.
Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to those who are joining us online today. My name is Tanya Van Biesen, President of Canadian Club Toronto, and your host. Canada's automotive industry recognizes that waiting for the American president to withdraw the 25% tariffs on vehicles and auto parts is not a viable strategy. A once reliable and strong industry partnership is now tense and fractured. Canadian jobs and our national economy are at stake, which calls for immediate and impactful action. Our expert panel will discuss how to meet this consequential trade challenge head-on, using the moment to reinforce the strength of Canadian ingenuity and resolve. Now, our partners and sponsors are critical to our club's ability to bring you these engaging discussions, and today's event is proudly sponsored by PwC. Thank you very much to PwC for your support. Canadian Bankers Association is our season sponsor, and Air Canada is our official airline sponsor, and Canada's Forest Trust Corporation is our smart forest planting sponsor, supporting our goal of reducing the club's carbon footprint. Amongst the audience today, we welcome students from York University's Masters in Public Policy, Administration and Law, and TMU's The Dais. We are very happy to have you here, and we hope you will have some great questions for the panel. Now, let me take a moment to share with you some club information before we introduce the panel. I invite you to visit our website at canadianclub.org. Besides event and membership information, you will also find a great on-demand feature if you have missed any of our past events. I also encourage you to share information about today's event on your favorite social media platforms. We love the attention, and it's great to get the word out. And of course, if you have questions for our panel, and I certainly hope that you do, you will find on your table Q&A cards and pens. We will be collecting those throughout the discussion, so please do not hesitate to write your question down. And for those who are joining us online, please hit the red Q&A button on the right side of your screen when we open the floor for questions. Now, I would like to introduce Chris Casey, Industrial Manufacturing and Automotive Sector Leader from PwC Canada, to formally introduce our panel. Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's fantastic to be here with so many great leaders that really care about the space at such an important time. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Tariffs, global tariffs have fundamentally shifted, and it's very consequential for the sector. We've been on this journey with many of you since the first tweet storm in November, hosting executive briefings, hosting important panel sessions, and we understand the pressure. We understand the frustration amongst leadership teams given all the volatility, and that's what makes discussions like today so important. We need to understand the glide path forward with tariffs and what to do about it. And we have an amazing panel of leaders today that'll have an amazing discussion. That being said, let me briefly introduce each of them. I'll start with Rob Wildeboer, Executive Chairman and Co-founder of Martin Rea, an amazing Canadian automotive supplier. Rob's been instrumental to the growth of the company. He's a big champion of automotive, but also he sits on as a co-chair of CAPC, which focuses on continued investment in the industry. And he's a well sought after advisor to domestic governments as well as international governments, given his expertise. We're super lucky that he's on our side as a Canadian and with us today. Next, I'll introduce Flavio Volpe, the president of the APMA, well-known champion of automotive in Canada. Whenever we have serious issues over the last 10 years, he's there for us, leading from the front. Whether it's pivoting the supply base during COVID when we needed PPE equipment, unblocking a border that was stuck by the truckers to get parts moving again, or taking one of the boldest industrial moonshots of our time with Project Arrow, where we showcased the ingenuity and innovation of our great supply base. Lately, he's been out in front on tariffs, as you all know, with over 500 interviews since November alone, fighting for us as a sector. And happy that you're here today, Flavio. Next, we have Blair Shepard. Blair is a recently retired partner at PwC. He led our global strategy for the firm at PwC. An amazing advisor, but also a co-author or an author of a very important book, 10 Years to Midnight, that was well ahead of its time, that reflected on mega trends that were very important in causing crises to come and hit us at a quicker pace than we were prepared for globally. And he put that in an amazing narrative that was a call to action for many stakeholders. Rumor has it he's writing a new book, and hopefully he shares a bit of both today. But before PwC had an amazing career at Duke University. He was the dean of the business school there. He helped them open up the China campus. He also helped them develop their corporate development program and won many amazing awards at the school. So Blair, thank you for being with us today. And then Shelley, we have a great moderator for today. Shelley sits on the leadership team at PwC Canada. She's 30 years in the industry as an advisor, but also in industry. And what's important about Shelley is she's actually been in the chair in industry as a CFO, as a COO, as a transformation executive. So she deeply understands the pressure that executives are under right now, and she's going to have some fun mixing it up with the panels today. So with that, Shelley, I'll pass it to you and we'll get into it.
Thanks so much, Chris. And I think what Chris left out is that my first career was actually social work and running jails and group homes, which may be the real reason I'm here to moderate today in terms of what I suspect will be a very lively and dynamic panel. So perhaps we'll get started right off the bat. And I think this has been a space where, wait 2 hours, wait 2 days, something changes again. And I thought what we could do is maybe start with painting a picture of the current state, not just of tariffs and trade. And Flavio, maybe we'll launch with you and then look for Blair and Rob to add some color.
Thank you. The industry was doing quite well, recovered from the pandemic, recovered from semiconductor shortages, starting to find its groove again. The last couple of years, especially in Canada, up until November, we went from announcement to announcement, Rasika, of big investments by multinational firms, including many OEMs. And for the first time in 35 years, Tony, we added the footprint. I keep talking to Rasika, but from Volkswagen and PowerCo, we added an OEM here. So we got to 6. So really good news. And we were looking at a transition that was going to be a little bit tough volume-wise for suppliers. But as we retooled, 2026, 27, 28 looked like they were going to be great years. Then the administration changed in the U.S. And with Donald Trump, we've been playing whack-a-mole on tariffs that beyond the entertainment value of it, for our industry, which is probably the most integrated transnational industry on the planet, it has been chaotic, to say the least. And so we see a series of tariffs that have really cooled down a few things. A series of tariffs, whether they're raw materials tariffs, cars or subcomponents, or universal tariffs threatened against rhetorical emergencies, threatened to be stacked, then threatened to be unstacked, then threatened to be doubled because we pulled booze off the shelf or that we were going to cut off electricity. Hard for any of the multinationals that are investing in production capacity here to plan forward. And then make it very difficult for suppliers who, and Rob will go into a lot more detail, I think, who are not just heavily invested on both sides of the border, but really their growth market is in the U.S. Hearing the U.S. administration say, we want you to pull the plug on your Canadian operations and set up here. Not understanding that they are not creating an oasis for consumer demand or investor comfort. And it's unprecedented, and we don't have a negotiating table. And I actually don't know what the next step is.
That's fair. Rob, by the way, if anybody in the audience has the next step, we'd be really keen to hear it as well. Rob, maybe a little bit from your perspective. Somebody got operations on both sides of the border. You're in the middle of all of this. What does this uncertainty do to you?
So we kind of live with uncertainty in this industry. Just to give you a nature or sense of the nature of our company, we started in 2001. Our first day when we bought 3 presses was September 10, 2001. The next day when I had a financing letter on my table, I got a message, we're probably not signing this today because something happened in New York. And I'm thinking, that was terrible, but obviously not the best time to buy presses. How am I going to pay for that? And we've been through a number of crises since that time. We saw a huge crisis in 2008 and 2009, which was a double whammy for the auto industry because oil prices went up. We had a recession in auto before we had the financial recession. We saw customers go bankrupt, and of course we had COVID. We had the supply shortages. We're used to, being punched in the face, basically, as an industry. The nature of our company is we started in Toronto. We have about 2,000 people in Canada, but we have double that in the United States. We have plants from Michigan down to Mississippi. We have double again in Mexico. We have a couple plants in China, but we have plants in Europe as well. So geopolitics is part of our considerations, just from a risk analysis and a return analysis and opportunity analysis. And I'd say before, and the interesting thing is we've kind of been through a Trump episode with the first USMCA, which I heard Jamie Dimon call in Washington 2 weeks ago, NAFTA 0.8, which it wasn't much different than the original NAFTA discussion. And we ended up, a lot of people got pummeled in terms of valuation and everything when he got elected. And by the time he was out of office, we were making record profits and the industry was doing extremely well. I would say that the industry was doing well, as Flavio said, but we were looking at a really good next 5 years for North America. And North America is very important to us in Canada because, quite frankly, most of the vehicles that we build here are sold in the United States, and a strong United States provides a lot of pull for our suppliers in our OEMs. And we are extremely integrated. Most of what we make here goes to the United States, most of which we buy in terms of vehicles comes from the United States. And we were looking at a pretty strong U.S. economy. And underlying that, you've got the ability to plan long term. You've got the ability to really have highly integrated supply chains to the extent that there is no border. So the Canada-U.S. border and the Mexico-U.S. border effectively crossing state lines. That's a good way to think about it. And you can't just stop that. So when we had the first announcement, I remember, the Thursday before, and Flavio's got fabulous inside information, as do we actually, because we're very well positioned in Canada, U.S., and Mexico. On the Thursday before the tariffs were announced on auto, the auto industry was told there's no tariffs on auto because it's completely integrated. And then Saturday morning, an announcement's made, and what about auto? Yeah, they're included. And by Sunday night, the markets opened in Japan, and Toyota went down 10%, and Honda went down 10%. We had an emergency CAPSI meeting in my office, or in one of our plants. Flavio was there, but so was Toyota. Like, you know, basically, number of people started at 9:30. By 10 to 10, Mexico's announced that the tariffs have been postponed. And the reality was, because if you put tariffs on North American-made parts, you shut the industry down. And no matter what the OEMs say, and some said, we'll push through it and all that type of stuff, but nobody wants to upset Trump and be subject to a tweet. But in the auto parts business, we said, listen, if you put tariffs on parts, the OEMs can't control the parts makers. You don't even know who's in the tier 2 or the tier 3 or the trucker that's moving over here. And all it takes is 1 or 2 or 5 to say, I'm not shipping because I can't afford it. Who's going to pay my tariff? Like, you know, how does that work? Plus, there's a ton of confusion and understanding. So we basically said, you know, this is where it is. Flavio was saying it very publicly. I was saying it more privately because you don't necessarily want to upset your customers and you know, say that they're wrong when they say they're going to push through it. And so the interesting thing is the second week of February, I was in the White House, not with the Donald, but with Hassett, who's one of his chief economic advisors. And I was in the West Wing. So, you know, I used to watch that show, and everyone walks around and talks. And so I was looking if everyone was walking around and talking, and that's exactly what they were doing, a lot of walking around. And so I said to Hassett, I said, do you realize that if the tariffs had gone in place on February 1st, and this is February 7th, so the following Monday, the industry would be shut down by now? And he said, what do you mean? I said, what do you mean, what do you mean? Like, let me walk you through it. And he had a fellow next to him who was taking notes, and I said, take very good notes. And he said, we did. So that's the story then. And I don't think they understood manufacturing and supply chain. And then so moved to 2 weeks ago. I was in Washington again with some members of the BCC. We met Prime Minister Carney on the Monday, but we had a session with Besant, who was the Treasury fellow, and he seems to have the pen on the tariffs these days because he's been more cautious than some of the other advisors of Trump. And we had a discussion, and in the course of his answer, I got to ask a question. Detailed question, I won't go through it right now, but he said, we've come to the conclusion that tariffs on North American auto parts would be a very bad idea. So that's the nature of how policy is going. It's been, in my view, if they're, you try and figure one word for it, I would call it incoherent. That doesn't mean that we can't lurch towards something that's really good in the context of North America, and we'll probably talk about that. And it's been rolled out, you know, kind of messily, but, you know, to a certain extent, in Washington, if you're in Washington, it's like shock and awe. Like there's so many changes going on everywhere at all the same time. When we were down there in February, auto wasn't even on the front page. You know, they were talking about a number of other things. So I think we're going to get to a better place. There is chaos, but the fundamental reality of our industry, the way I always look at it, is people need vehicles. This is the way we move ourselves around. They need parts for vehicles. They need really good suppliers, and we can work things out pretty well. So I think we're in about the 4th or 5th inning of a 9-inning game, which could be an extended innings. I don't know.
Let's just hope they keep the pitch
clock on. That's kind of my take right now.
Blair, maybe before we go directly to what could be next in terms of how this plays out, it's interesting to hear both Flavio and Rob mention Trump, but I think we've seen pretty populist election. We've seen a lot of the same trends in other parts of the globe, not necessarily just across the border. You've written pretty extensively about what's changing, both in terms of mega trends around trade, supply chains, balance of influence, excuse me, and what's happening in terms of how value pools are shifting. How would you describe the trade environment right now, specifically, and what should Canada be thinking about as we head into this next round?
So I think it's right that the first thing that both of them said is it's uncertain, right? And it's really hard to plan in uncertainty. But I want to sort of go back and say there's a couple of things I think Canada needs to learn from this. And please understand, I was born in Canada, raised in Canada. The reason I'm in the U.S. is because my wife is an American, and when I left McGill, we said we'll find the best joint offer. You can trust my math on this because I didn't think about 10-to-1 odds we'd end up in the United States, and I've been trying to come back for a long time. So I am not an arrogant American trying to tell you how to run your country. I love the country I was born in. So the thing I think that's important is he's been elected twice, which tells you something about the zeitgeist of the American population, right? And if you go back and say, why is the world fractured today? It's fractured because we had 70 years of massive success. And that success was built on 4 assumptions. The first is globalization is only good. The second is technology is only good. The third is that the only measure that matters is GPS, right? And the fourth is that the U.S. could fund the global market and could police the world. Now, it turns out, if you think about those 4 theses, they were perfect to come out of the Second World War. They were a great way to bring China and India into global trade. But sustaining those 4 ideas for 70 years meant there was going to be a dark side. If you look at the United States, the dark side is the middle class has been destroyed. We have massive disparities in wealth. And the capacity to clothe, feed, make, build for ourselves has gone away. So he is an extreme response to very legitimate concerns. So I think it's important for anyone in Canada to recognize that we aren't going back. Right? Now, I agree that auto is a thing that has to be reasonably managed because it does, but so to think about some of the consequences of the policy, it turns out there won't be Christmas this year because Chinese manufacturers aren't building because they don't think they can send toys over and people afford them at the rates they've got them at, and 98% of the toys bought in the United States are built in China, right? So not auto parts, not Christmas. I'm not sure which is worse, but they're both pretty damn bad, right? I mean, but the thing you need to understand is it's real. The final thing I think is that what is happening is the opening salvo in a remaking of the global trade logic. And so this isn't the end of it, right? And I think auto parts may be the best opportunity Canada has, maybe energy, but there's going to be a ton of disruption between the Canadian-American relationship for the next 10 or 20 years.
If I can comment on that.
Please do.
Like, I agree 100%. I mean, you make decisions very long term. You have to. When you put up an assembly plant, it's a 30-year investment, right? Toyota's not moving their plants to the United States. They're still making vehicles and so forth. But, we had this debate 20 years ago in our company whether to set up in China. And I said no. And they said, why wouldn't you? Like everyone, there's money to be made and everything. There's money to be made, but in my lifetime, the crap's going to hit the fan, right? And we had customers going down there, General Motors and Ford. Where are they in China today, right? In that context, one guy on our board used to be the head of Ford China, and he said, I remember the good days. Well, the good days are not so good when what happens, and so geopolitics is a fundamental thing that we got to think about. And I haven't read your book, but I ordered it already. And now that we've talked yesterday, and I view the world the same way. So I think the future of a business like auto, and I think the way Canada should think as well. I do believe in regional. I think there's going to be regions, and I think North America is a very strong region. And I always say the United States has been blessed with the 4 best neighbors in the world: the Atlantic, the Pacific, Canada to the north, and Mexico to the south. And you have hardworking people in Mexico. Mexico's a wonderful place. It's got challenges, obviously. Canada's got challenges. But if we ever put that together, this is the region that's going to be the greatest economic region in the world, because we have everything that we need as long as we do that. Mexico's got to replace China for manufacturing, right? In that context, Canada can be there, and we've got to, employ all the things that we need to: AI, new technology, automation, all that type of stuff to do that. And today we can't. So in auto, if you want to make a vehicle, I'm not sure we have the die capacity in this continent to make a vehicle, right? That's how far it's gone. And it went because a lot of people, and that includes our customers, said, we'd love to have dies made in Ontario, and this industry in Ontario was built by tool and die makers, right? People that came from Austria and Germany and so forth. We had wonderful tool and die makers. And the customers basically say, we'd love to use you in Ontario, but you have to do the made in China price, which is a cheat, right? It's all subsidized. If I put a plant in China, they said, there's your land, we'll build you your factory, we'll do all this type of stuff, why don't you just do it? And we didn't. And we didn't because we thought, there'd be some issues. So to me, the geopolitics, it's all about China. It's how do you deal with the U.S. versus China situation? And that's why, thinking from an automotive perspective, I think we're going to lurch to an area where the U.S. is going to have to realize who are its allies and friends. There's a rejigging of the relationship, there's no question. But at the end of the day, and we're going to have to pick also basically where we're on, where the side we're on. That's my view.
Kids are getting crankshafts instead of toys for Christmas to start.
Yeah, it's okay. They're pretty cool.
We'll find other markets.
Yeah.
But maybe tying those two things together is, if you think about what Blair shared and where you're taking the vision, Rob, Flavio, you had a pretty bold statement this morning in the Globe and Mail. Why now? Why a Canadian automotive industry, tip to tail?
So what we're talking about here is I've spent the last 20 years, Tony Lamantia spent the last 20 years, Giles Gerson spent the last 20 years saying, this is a really good place to make money. But we got the people, we've got the technologies, we got the post-secondary ecosystem, we've got available capital, we've got access to the U.S. market. Make your cars here. Make your parts here, invest in your applied technologies here, take advantage of all the infrastructure that we built here and the fact that we are welcoming to transnationals. And look at the metrics. We talk a lot about productivity in this country, and we're saying there's a productivity gap that's growing in Canada. But in automotive, we lead in productivity in Canada. And we spent the last couple of years selling very successfully commitments totaling $50 billion. To 6 different automakers on why this is the best place to make cars. But we never said that argument ends at the border. We didn't say we couldn't make cars. We just never took the ambition to take that other step to say, why can't we? Why don't we? Now, part of the reason why we don't is that the economics of the early part of the 20th century first wiped out smaller Canadian players as M&A activity built scale around the U.S. proposition. And then, hey, we did the auto pact that said, hey, you're going to get all those industrial benefits. If you buy cars from the D4, 5 if you include Studebaker, then we'll commit to making stuff there. And it was good. It worked. And we have a very good fundamental footprint for automotive in Canada. Now, a few years ago, we renegotiated the TPP. I sat in a lot of those room next door conversations. Canada sold out content levels in that agreement to get access for what I said was products that grow on 4 legs. And it was really important for other sectors, but we continue this trend, this globalization trend of let's trade away access to our market in content in our advanced manufacturing processes to get access for agricultural goods. To me, that it bemoaned a lack of ambition here. The countries that had the OEs tipped the scale in the TPP. We forced 2 more rounds, the parts sector forced 2 more rounds of TPP negotiations in Atlanta and San Francisco to try to hold that up. Ultimately, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, both as the 2 nominees in that election, said, we're not signing on to TPP. Ultimately saved us from that problem. The NAFTA renegotiation at the end was guided by what would the OEs sign up for? We went up to 75% local content from 62.5%, and Detroit said, you go any higher, and you have a 2.5% MFN tariff penalty. Well, you can turn the screws as hard as you want. If you break the threads, we'll just source where we want. So we stopped where we were. I think it's time for us to turn around and say, the Prime Minister has said, we're never going to trust the Americans again. Doesn't mean we're not going to do business with them again. But, you know, let's have a national ambition in industrial policy and in the posture with which we lean into the wind. Well, why don't we do what Mexico is doing, or what Vietnam did? When we were negotiating the TPP, I was told by everybody, you're being an alarmist. What are you worried about Vietnam and Malaysia for? Well, Vietnam has like you go to Yorkdale Shopping Center, you go to Sherway, you can buy a VinFast. This is a vehicle that is a competitive product, designed by Ferrari's designer. They didn't get the chassis sorted out in the first round. Okay, well, they'll do it on the second round. The noodle king of Vietnam, amongst other things, but he's convinced the federal government to say, look, advanced economies cluster around advanced manufacturing. Beyond the shelter, the biggest expense for anybody around the world is transportation, and it is actually the biggest, the most expensive, the most advanced portable good anybody can buy. Why wouldn't we be in that business? Mexico, President Sheinbaum has taken a different tact in Canada with Donald Trump, been very quiet. It hasn't gone there any further than it has with us, but she has said, we're going to build an insurance policy. It's called Alinea. We're going to do a $10,000 U.S. vehicle. Now, that sounds crazy, but you know, here's a country with 3 times as many people as us, and they buy less cars than us because it's a disposable income issue. She says, we're going to build a car company that sells to Mexican disposable income. And Turkey went to the same Pininfarina and designed a series of vehicles under the brand TOG, and they invested in their sector and said, well, listen, if Eastern Europe is the part supplier to Western Europe, and we're in this gateway geography, maybe we should get in that business. So if you read the Globe today, it's not an op-ed piece. It's Adam Radwanski saying, Flavio Volpe says, we should really look at doing this. But there's a couple of very clear things I said in this. Our Project Arrow is not what I'm talking about. We said in Project Arrow, let's show the world what we can do from a parts point of view. We did not design that for series production. I'm not suggesting we put that into series production. But it's kind of like John the Baptist, to show the way. Okay?
I'm not sure how many more politically incorrect.
Yeah, I don't want to blaspheme here, but I've been trying to explain this to people. Why wouldn't you use this one?
And Christ is sitting in this room somewhere.
Yeah. Why don't you use this one? What I'm suggesting is that we take the greatest minds in this country, advanced manufacturing, finance people, engineering people, advanced applications of technology, AI, machine learning, that was born here, material sciences people, critical minerals people, and say, if you were going to do it, which would just buy some insurance, how would you do it? What segment would you pick? Where would it be? And then you also have to be humble enough to accept that if we get Chris Casey to lead a team to look at this, and his team says, it doesn't really work. And you say, okay, look, we gave it a shot. I've been doing this a long time and hearing a lot of people. I went to school with that guy over there, Carlo Di Girolamo, and when we were in school, they said, this guy's not going to amount to anything. It was probably Carlo who said that. I spent my entire career saying, okay, well, why don't we try something a little different? And so let's try this a little bit different. And if we won't try, that's a shame. After all of this, that's a shame. We should be embarrassed for always listening to people say, no, let's do it the more comfortable and safe way. Well, the big leagues are changing, and Mexico and Turkey and Vietnam have a franchise, and we're in the minor leagues. Not good enough.
So let me throw this out to all of you.
Go ahead.
You've heard, I think Chris used it in his opening remarks, concept of glide path. Rob, you've talked about it being the most integrated supply chain on the globe in terms of automotive parts. How does that lend to Canada needing to build some new muscles? If I think about fitness, you don't get fitter or stronger walking on a flat road over and over and over again on the same path. What do we need to do next in order to actually take advantage of this opportunity?
So can I follow on, Flavio? Because I want to generalize the argument. Right. So one of the trends that's happening in the world is this fracturing trend, right, which we're talking about today. There are 3 others that are really important we have to keep in mind. The first one is we have 2 technologies that our universal technologies are getting cheaper every day and actually are passing intelligence across generations, AI and synthetic biology, right? The third trend is that climate is really happening. Even though we deny it, it's really happening, and we have to completely reinvent our industrial technology system based on climate. And the final one is that the wealthy world is getting old. If you put those four things together, we have to completely reinvent the industrial technology system in the world. We have no choice, right? And so if you step back, so if there ever was a disruption, I just gave it to you, right? 4 tidal waves. We're talking about fracturing, and Donald Trump is one, but there are 3 others that are even bigger, right? Well, maybe demography is not bigger, but 2 of them are bigger, right? We have no choice but to reinvent. So as the head of strategy at PwC, I used to spend my time saying, what country is best positioned to respond to those trends? Number 1 in the world is Canada. But you're not doing it. You're just not doing it, right? So we have to remake how we feed ourselves. We have to remake how we move ourselves. We have to remake how we build things for ourselves. We have to remake how we take care of ourselves. We have to remake how we defend ourselves. We have to remake the energy system that supports all of those things. We have no choice. We have about 20, 30 years to do it, or we don't want to hand that world to our grandchildren, okay? We have to remake how we advise. It turns out 60% of the hours PwC gives isn't going to be there 5 years from now. AI is going to take it over. We have to completely remake the industrial structure. So I have no idea why Canada isn't taking advantage of that and saying there are going to be 4 or 5 sectors we're going to be the best in the world at. And why do I say Canada is better positioned? First, you've got the Canadian Shield is the oldest mountain range in the world. Therefore, it has more raw material than any other mountain range in the world, right? Second, it's got an incredibly broadly educated population, right? So I'm at Duke, and it's probably fair to say the best universities in the world are probably Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford, Harvard, but the average Canadian university is better than any other university on average. The median is spectacular, right? You've got people who want to come to the country, right? I'm not sure we're managing the immigration policy as well as it should be, but want to come to the country, right? And actually the US has scared them to death, so they're not coming. So you could replace Silicon Valley if you chose to. But I think there's a couple other things that are really important. It turns out if you're going to remake an entire ecosystem, which you tried to do and actually are recommending happens, if you remake an entire ecosystem, it's virtually impossible to do in the United States because it's too bloody big. And the only way it happened in Canada was one guy drove it from the center, which you can't do in Canada and the United States because we're democracies. So you actually have to get parties together to agree on co-creating a new ecosystem, right? Which you did. So Flavio proved that Canada could do it. Right? So I have this image of a cottage in Port Sandfield, and I'm sorry for the Albertans that I use this, I'm from Ontario, so there's my image. Image of a cottage in Port Sandfield where 20 critical people in the sectors you want to grow in get together and say, what does it look like to be the next version of what this industry looks like, right? If Canada doesn't grab that mantle, I'll be embarrassed that I'm a Canadian citizen.
So following from that, I mean, I'm not sure my comments are quite as broad, but the interesting thing about what's happened with the Trump situation, the American criticism of Canada, is for the most part, they're right. We had a border issue, you know, we got to fix it. We have a fentanyl issue, and maybe it's not fentanyl as much as we're soft on crime. That's an issue. We don't defend ourselves. We don't spend money on the military. We don't take care of our Arctic, which maybe, you know, is becoming a playground for other countries, or could be. We've got interprovincial trade barriers that we should be knocking down. I used to be chair of the MacDonald-Laurier Institute. We've been writing about this since the think tank started. Like, you know, how much of an issue it is, and we can't send our energy to the East Coast because of pipelines. We should have a pipeline strategy. Those are 6 things that we should be doing, and I think we just got a wake-up call. This was a country that in 1967 was the 3rd richest country in the world on a per capita basis. We spent 3 to 4% on our military. Our reputation was terrific. We built big things like the CN Tower, which was the tallest structure in the world. And we don't do that anymore. And so at the end of the day, we've got to wake up and essentially recognize this. So I actually, in the context of all of this, don't like the, terrifying times that we have in the auto industry, et cetera. I think this is tremendous opportunity. So that's point one. Point two and three will be quick. CAPC is the Canadian Automotive Partnership Council. Its goal is to have an automotive industry in this country. Not because it's just auto, but because it's advanced manufacturing. And our focus has essentially been, in order to do that, you have to, because the suppliers will follow the assembly, you need assembly here. And you have to find assembly from different places and so forth. We've done, a decent job, but we now produce half the vehicles that we did in the late 90s because of the growth of Mexico. And so some people would say the health of the Canadian industry is down and all that type of stuff. But when we started on September 10, 2001, we had zero automotive revenues. We have $5 billion now and 18,000 people around the world. Linamar was about $1 billion, they're $10 billion now. Magna was about $13 billion, they're $50 billion now. And they have ABC, which just bought TI Automotive, they're about $7 billion. That is unbelievable success. And we have competed with suppliers in the United States and other places. All our competitors went bankrupt in the United States, or would have been bankrupt if they weren't bailed out. We had customers bailed out. And so when we hear things like, Canadians can't compete, we say bullshit. Like, we compete every day against the best in the world. The only ones that I have a problem with are the Chinese because they're subsidized. But we can do all of the stuff that they can do. And we can do it better. And we can do it by, empowering people in our plants and all that type of stuff. And so the health of our industry is really quite good. And then the third thing I'll say is that capacity. We've got to put all that together. We've got to put, deep learning and AI. We had a executive discussion this morning. We think we're doing okay, but the point is we're not going fast enough, right, in that context. And, this is the ecosystem in technology that we've produced. We produced the BlackBerry, which was world-leading technology. We were early users of the internet. I used to be a lawyer. I was financing companies in Waterloo and Ottawa and Toronto in the mid-90s where everyone in the world was coming here to invest in open text and Descartes systems and a whole bunch of others. And we've kind of lost that too. But external threats, Canadians, elbows up, we do okay. And that's why I'm optimistic. But we needed this more broadly than in our sector. Our sector is lean and competitive because it has to be, because we compete on a world scale. And we have people from Japan, Europe, Mexico, U.S., all competing with us, and we compete in their ponds, and we do really well. But a lot of our stuff is protected. We've gone fat, and we've gone lazy. And at the end of the day, what you got to do is get in shape.
We spent a lot of time standing up for our sovereignty the last 4 or 5 months from a threat we never thought would have, nobody would have predicted would have existed. Nobody modeled for the U.S. president going off the deep end. That's really only half the battle, right? So if you're going to protect, you're going to defend something, the right for your country to exist as an independent actor, all the strengths and the values that we hold, all our history. You never win by just playing defense. Somebody's got to put a puck across the line.
Yeah, so tell the Leafs that.
Well, this is why for the 49th time in my life, we're not looking at them in the final. And but the Leafs are actually a great analogy. Look, they've got everything, right? They've got a loyal fan base, they got money, they got talent. They've got millions of people willing them to win. They've got tens of millions of people willing for them to lose. You should get motivated from that. And they're not finding that path forward. What's the new narrative? What's the Maple Leafs? And I see the most rabid fans are the youngest. And I'm like, you haven't suffered enough. And in our business, the most hopeful people are the youngest. Because they see who we are from a technology point of view. They've heard us vehemently defend something even when we can't define it. I think in our business, we have to turn around and say, what is it that defines us? What is Canadian automotive? I take delegations to a plant in Vaughan all the time because I show them a great host company shows them AI applications, machine learning, autonomous and collaborative robotics, a highly skilled workforce that stretches from everywhere from advanced engineers to advanced skilled general laborers, in a plant that is connected to its suppliers electronically, that handles inputs and outputs in a very advanced manner. We snuck the U.S. negotiating team during NAFTA in there to teach them what a direct labor is, so that when we defined what that $16 an hour was, we had them look at the most advanced application. It's a company called Allfield Industries that probably wouldn't have survived on its own if it wasn't for Canadian ingenuity that said, there's opportunity here because we're so good. And if we have somebody drive the M&A process and consolidate what's here and then push that out into the States and into Mexico and around the world, we can bring that Canadian posture around the world successfully. That's a Martin Rea plant. I know Rob's sitting right here, but
I was waiting for you to say that.
That plant is as good, if not better, than anything that the Chinese do, but it has to survive on a profit and loss basis. We need to put a cathedral on the hill. That cathedral on the hill could be a Canadian national car company that takes everything that we know how to do and competes successfully in markets that we already peek into, and helps tell that Canadian story and lives together with the other 6 OEMs that are invested here, and then brings Canadian products. You know, as we're defending Canada elbows up, I keep getting asked by Americans, what are Canadian brands? And before we get cartoonish about Canadian Tire and Tim Hortons, we gotta be able to say things like we did with a Swagger 15 years ago, Research in Motion and BlackBerry. Or 25 years ago when we said Nortel. That helped to tell the story. The next time we get into a trade negotiation, I don't watch somebody else put their thumb on the scale. Because we are somebody in that argument, and we get the kids. I'll say the last thing, when we unveiled the Project Aero, the prototype at the 50th Canadian Auto Show, it was the first time a non-OE vehicle was the feature, and the first question in front of 400 assembled journalists is, can I buy one? Yeah, it's $20 million. But 10 years from now, somebody's kid will have seen this and will understand what an astronaut is and what a module was that orbits around the planet. And they'll say, well, we're going to land on the moon. And on the 60th, we'll have a Canadian automaker, or maybe Canadian automakers, who figured out how to 3D print crashable chassis and change the manufacturing process so that you can do small batches. We got to aim for something better than to be ready for the next time to play defense.
So I'm going to ask each of you, as we get ready to close up this afternoon, what message do you want to leave this audience with in terms of what we absolutely have to get right next?
I'll go last, because I don't know the answer yet.
So I think that what I would hope both auto manufacturing does in Canada, but Canada more broadly does, is identify the places where Canada can create the next version of what the system needs to look like. And as a result, create the leading edge. So think about what happened in China. There was a guy who actually worked for Audi who moved to China and said, we're going to build the next version of what a car needs to look like, right? And they did. Now, we control it from the center. We're not going to be able to do it that way. But what's the next version of what this sector needs to look like? And pick a few and go make it and be the leading place in the world for those sectors. Right? And I asked that, and so I think the first thing is figure out what those are, get the people together and decide to do it, and actually then do it. Right? But I want to tell a story. I've been trying to get back to Canada a lot, and one of the things I did was I interviewed at UBC. And my wife said, okay, if you want to go back, we'll go to Vancouver. And I went down, and I said, but I want to talk to the business community downtown. So I went downtown, and I met a particular set of people, not everyone. But it was a really disappointing conversation. This was about 20 years ago. And I said, so what's your ambition for Vancouver? And they said, well, you know, we don't really have one. It's a nice place. I'm being a little unkind, but that's sort of what they said, right? I said, so what do you want to grow? They said, well, it doesn't really make sense to grow anything because as soon as a company gets to 500 million, it moves to Seattle. That killed me. That conversation killed me. And it's been haunting me ever since I had that. And I didn't go to UBC, by the way. Largely because of that conversation, right? So the thing I want, I hope, is that Canada recognizes how special it is and chooses to go lead in a few places where it has a comparative advantage. Right? And I think I want to highlight, if it doesn't, it will lose big time because value is moving around the world at a pace we've never seen before. So there'll be big winners and big losers. And if you're not a big winner, you are a big loser. So that would be my thought.
I like that. We've got all the tools to do things differently, but it's a culture shift. What will we pick to represent us around the world to tell the Canadian story? And it doesn't have to be AI or machine learning or additive manufacturing, although it should be. It could also be how we take the moment to get lithium, cobalt, graphite to market to answer PowerCo's question of when can I get it and in what volume. So it could be 85% of the world's critical minerals processing capacities in China. And we keep arguing with the White House. Well, why don't we tell the White House we're going to spend $4 billion building that up here? And then learn from what we did during the pandemic, which was to take a series of consecutive processes and make them concurrent, Giles, and get to market really quick on stuff that we absolutely needed at the time, PPE and ventilators, Rob. And have that approach to say, in these things, we're going to have a different posture. So when the world says, what is Canada? The answer isn't a cultural answer of, you know, what we like and what the country looks like and how polite we are. Because we don't even have to put elbows up. We're pretty tough anyway. Now, I have 4 kids who don't care about cars, but who are learning from me and their mother the things that we learned from our parents, which is you can do whatever you want, but you got to serve. And you have to give an example that your kids got to work harder than you for the community. Now, what better way to do that than to demonstrate that you've built these monuments to Canadian ingenuity? We had a kid working on Project Arrow at Ontario Tech University who was one of the 4 kids who got to say that their grad year project was we're building a functioning prototype. And I said to him, you know, better be on your resume. A hell of a project. I can't tell you what I did in my senior year. Probably BS some essay. And, right. And so I said to him, if you do it and you do it right, I'm going to introduce you to Ferrari. We're doing a little bit of work with Ferrari. And we'll see if we can get you placed over there. Well, the more I got to know the kid, the more I realized that what was important was he's got to be on Project Arrow. And that we need to bring what he thinks his future looks like into the conversation while he works on our present. He's over there. He didn't want me to tell this story. Andrew Genovese, I convinced him to work for a trade association because we're making 5 more prototypes to show the world at places like COP28 and JSAE in Hanover, Mass, who we are as Canadians. He might launch the next car company or the other 3 that work with him on that or the thousands that see it. But God, we got to tell him that it's possible. And if we fail in the attempt, that's just as good.
It's well said. Rob, the last word to you.
All right, so I'll just do the auto thing and then a general comment. So where I think we're lurching towards what could be very good for our auto industry in North America are 5 things. And I had this discussion with Basant, so to come back to it. 1, you need free trade in autos and parts in North America between Canada, U.S., and Mexico. 2, you need higher North American content without loopholes. 3, you need to have a penalty more than 2.5% for not complying, so make it 25%. 4, with respect to Europe, Japan, and South Korea, you have to find ways for them to make more here because they sell more here. You can do it by tariffs, or you can do it by quotas, or you can do it by incentives. At the end of the day, if we have another 2 million vehicles built in North America, and don't forget, we buy in North America about 20 million vehicles, we make 15. We import about 5, okay? And most of those are to the United States. If you had that increased production, everybody's happy in the United States and Canada and Mexico. And 5, you got to keep China out. You got to keep them out with their OEMs. You got to keep them out with their parts guys, including ownership indirectly, because they cheat. And at the end of the day, I think we're lurching towards it. I think we're kind of there on the first 3. It's up to Canada and Mexico to negotiate that in the USMCA renegotiation, but I think we'll get there. So that's the auto side, and I'm optimistic about that. It's been messy, but Flavio and I and a number of other people have been working on that. I think that's very important for our Canadian-based automotive industry. And then on a broader thing, we all, at some point, ask the question, why are we here, right? And in that context, I'm not sure I'm an auto guy. I used to be a lawyer and everything else, but what I've spent a lot of time doing is helping to build companies and helping to build people and helping to build, hopefully, a country. And so in that context, I've been impressed by so many people who think like that are leading Canadian companies and so forth. And so what I say from a public policy point of view, the government can't do all this, okay? Nor should it. It's inefficient, ineffective in so many ways. But create an environment that rewards entrepreneurialism and capital building, lower taxes, get access to markets, and take the shackles off. Take the shackles off, and don't tell us what to do. Just give us the environment that allows us to do it. We'll attract the best in the world, and we'll be the best in the world.
Yes.
Well said.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. I feel like this was a tough love lunch. Long on tough, but also long on love. You were frank, you were realistic. Most importantly, though, you were optimistic and you were ambitious, which is inspiring. So thank you to all of you for being here today. Thank you, Shelley. I don't think you needed to pull out the prison armor, which I'm glad to see. I know you're all running, so quickly before we close, let me share a couple of details about upcoming events. June 3rd, we welcome Kevin Strain, CEO of Sun Life. June 4th, we will reflect on a decade of the Truth and Reconciliations report with an expert panel focused on economic reconciliation. We also have a busy June. We will welcome Ontario's Minister of Energy and Mines, Stephen Lecce. So we do hope to see you before the end of the summer. As always, I would like to thank our sponsors today, PwC. I would also like to thank our AV supplier, VVC Live, for facilitating today's event. Thank you all for being here, and have a great rest of your day.